Would you want to be in a relationship with a man who is 4.5 feet tall? Diane never imagined that the man she was dating online was a midget. She was even taller than him when she settled it down. Diane is a tall, beautiful woman. She was in a failed marriage, but they split up peacefully, so they're still business partners after the divorce. She and her ex-husband co-run a law firm. One day, Diane realizes she's lost her cell phone. She was very anxious. Luckily, a man answered the phone. The man told Diane that during the time she had lost her phone, her ex-husband had called her several times and sent her many messages. He thought Diane was being pestered by her ex-husband, so Diane hastened to say that they were only working together and had been divorced for 3 years. But her comment got him interested. He wanted to meet Diane and return her phone in person. Diane didn't want to go, but she reluctantly agreed to do so after being repeatedly invited. The next day, Diane arrived at the restaurant. She was surprised to see the man. She didn't realize that he was only 4.5 feet tall. Alexander's dwarfism was not genetic. It was the result of a developmental problem that occurred when he was a child. Alexander wasn't surprised to see Diane's surprise. He wasn't angry about it either. He seemed to be used to such attitudes. Alexander even made a joke about his height. This also relieved Diane's embarrassment. Alexander then asked Diane if she had plans for that afternoon. Anna said she was free in the afternoon, so Alexander said he would give Diane an afternoon date of a lifetime. Diane was a little uneasy. She was about to say no, but it was too late because Alexander had already picked up the phone and called for a private jet. This shocked Diane. She had no idea that Alexander was so wealthy underneath his tiny exterior. Soon the plane was ready. Diane boarded the plane with Alexander, but then the unexpected happened again. Diane never dreamed that Alexander would want to take her skydiving. Her legs were shaking as she stood on the plane 10,000 meters above the ground. How could she dare to jump? But Alexander looked like he didn't care. He said it was the second time he had skydived. When Diane heard that, she panicked even more. He had only skydived twice and he was going to take her skydiving. Is this a joke? But Alexander didn't give her a chance to object. He jumped straight out of the plane with one leap. Soon after, they landed safely. Diane's whole body was in a state of excitement. She was talking to Alexander about how she was feeling at the moment. Diane couldn't contain her excitement, just as Alexander had said. Diane will never forget this afternoon, and it was this experience that changed Diane's mind about Alexander. She was captivated by this funny and charming man. She always thought of Alexander from time to time when she returned. Diane couldn't help but laugh every time she thought of him. The seeds of love had already sprouted. A few days later, Diane took the initiative to call Alexander. This time, Alexander took Diane to a very secret restaurant. This restaurant only receives regular customers. No one else could get in. Alexander said that the chefs of this restaurant all work on the ship, so they can come here to eat food from all over the world. At this point, the atmosphere was a bit awkward, so Alexander suggested to tell jokes. Diane was having a hard time because the jokes she told never made anyone laugh, but Alexander didn't care. And what surprised Diane was that she and Alexander were like a soulmate. Her jokes always make Alexander laugh, and Alexander's jokes were always funny to her. They both had a great time that night. Diane kissed Alexander on her way back, and so the love between them came to be. Diane brought her midget boyfriend, who was 4.5 feet tall, to a family gathering. Her mother looked incredulous at the man who walked in front of her. She couldn't believe that he was her daughter's new boyfriend. Alexander knows his problem, too, so he tries his best to be nice to Diane's parents. He wanted to impress them, but as the other guests continued to laugh at him, Diane couldn't resist the pressure. She claims that Alexander is just a friend of hers. Her mother was relieved. In fact, after the last kiss, Alexander and Diane had been in a relationship since their last kiss. After they went on another date, Alexander asked Diane that if the car went to the right, he would take Diane home. If the car was going left, he would go back to his house. This way they could be closer to each other. Diane didn't answer. The next moment, Alexander kicked the gas pedal and drove to the left. But just as they were making out, Diane looked in the mirror and saw the smaller Alexander. She was still having a hard time accepting this because of her vanity. Alexander sensed the change in her mood, but he didn't say anything. He just told Diane with his sincere and passionate eyes he really loves her. Feeling wrapped up in love, Diane no longer cared about that. She just wants to drown in love. A night passes. When Diane woke up, Alexander had already left. Only his son, Bungie, was left at home. Diane and Bungie then talked. Diane got to know Alexander better through him. It turned out that he was kinder than Diane had imagined. Alexander's nanny was often lazy. Bungie expressed his dissatisfaction and wanted to fire her. Alexander said the nanny's husband had just passed away, so he wants Bungie to be more tolerant of her. But her husband has been dead for years. How could Alexander not know? But he prefers to look at the world with a kind eye. Even though Diane knew that Alexander was a wonderful man. He was funny and rich, gentle and kind, but due to her vanity, she still couldn't introduce Alexander to her friends and family officially. Diane wanted to buy Alexander clothes, but she searched all the men's stores but couldn't find the right clothes. Even the smallest size was too big for Alexander. In the end, she had to go to a children's clothing store to buy him a dress. When people asked her who she was buying for, Diane only dared to say that she bought it for her own child. Alexander was very happy to receive the gift. He was even a little excited because he hadn't received a gift for years. He could feel Diane's feelings for him, but at the same time, there was also anxiety in his heart. Although Alexander had introduced Diane to everyone around him, but Diane never introduced him to any of her friends. Diane was at a loss for words when Alexander questioned her. Diane said that since she and her ex-husband divorced, she had cut off contact with many of her friends, so she didn't have any friends she could introduce to him. If Alexander didn't mind, he could go and meet her parents. Alexander was overjoyed to hear this news. He was so happy to meet his future mother-in-law. He just didn't think it would end up like this. Looking at Alexander's sad face, Diane couldn't help but kiss him and comfort him. And that was the end of it. But the problem between them always existed. This also became the trigger for the breakup of their relationship. The 4'5" boyfriend came to pick up his girlfriend from work. But no sooner had Alexander sat her down, her ex-husband came into the office. He mocked and ridiculed his ex-wife's new boyfriend. He kept calling Alexander a midget. But Alexander didn't take it personally. Even when people were hostile to him, he was always so accommodating and courteous. This day, Diane and Alexander went to the beach for a vacation. However, they happened to meet a store assistant from a children's clothing store. She asked Diane if the clothes she bought for her son fit. When Diane was embarrassed and didn't know how to answer, Alexander, who had gone to buy ice cream, happened to walk by. He noticed that the other child was wearing the same clothes as him. The atmosphere instantly became weird. At this moment, Alexander also understood everything. In fact, he always knew that his height problem would have a big impact on Diane. It was also his height that led to his divorce from his ex-wife. He thought Diane would be different from other women, but then Alexander realized that no woman really seemed to care about his height. Apart from his short height, he was really a very good man. Alexander didn't want to make things difficult for Diane. He also didn't want her to continue to be unhappy about such things, so he proposes a breakup. Maybe this is the best choice for them. Diane didn't refuse. Maybe in her heart, she already had such a plan. Diane just did not make up her mind. But when the moment of breaking up really came, her heart ached again. Diane couldn't stop the tears from flowing down her face. They originally thought it was just a breakup, but the breakup brought such a big change to their lives. Alexander was in a state of frustration, anger, and resentment every day. His temper became more and more violent. He used to be a very gentle man, but now he also loses his temper with his nanny. All this was seen by his son. No matter what people think of Alexander, but Bungie always thought that Alexander was the greatest father ever. He was also the best man in the world. Diane couldn't stop thinking about Alexander every day. It wasn't long before she couldn't resist coming to see Alexander. But she was stopped at the door by his son because he didn't want Diane to hurt Alexander again. If she wasn't ready to conquer her vanity, she better not bother them again. Diane then had to turn around and leave. Distraught, Diane found a friend and confided in her about Alexander. But to Diane's surprise, instead of comforting her, her friend said that Diane was to blame. The real midget in this relationship is Diane, despite Alexander's height deficiency. But love itself is not limited by height. Alexander is a man who could convince even Diane's ex-husband. We can see how good Alexander is. However, Diane was always obsessed with his height. She was too concerned with the eyes of others. She was afraid to look at her own heart. Diane suddenly understood everything after her friend's lecture. She decided to prove to Alexander this time she would never back down again. She then jumped out of the plane by parachute. Diane landed directly in front of Alexander. She told Alexander that she had overcome her fears. She was no longer afraid of heights or what people would see. She doesn't care what people think. She only wanted to be with Alexander. Alexander was stunned by the sudden and sincere confession. He didn't expect that Diane would express her feelings in this way, although he still had some doubt in his mind. But he preferred to believe that love was enough to overcome everything, and they need to give love a chance. Maybe love isn't as simple as it seems. It can be mixed with many things. We may be hesitant and uncertain about it, because of one thing or another. But when we don't know how to proceed, we can ask ourselves whether our hearts still love each other. Love may not solve all problems, but love can give you enough strength to solve all problems. So we all need to learn to give love a chance.